This year's International Petrochemical Conference in San Antonio, Texas, was of particular significance to INEOS, as the company's chairman and CEO, Jim Ratcliffe, was there in person to receive the 2013 Petrochemical Heritage Award for his outstanding contribution and visionary approach to the global petrochemical industry. Previous winners have included many of the industry's biggest and most influential characters, and Inch was there to see Jim join this exclusive group and to talk to those responsible for the judging.
We look for people who demonstrate extraordinary entrepreneurship, and through their entrepreneurship make important contributions not only to the petrochemical industry, but to society in general.
He's a risk taker. You know, he actually took not just significant risk, but he was creative in his thinking. The way he went about this, it had never been done before, and that really led the whole selection committee. I mean, it was a pretty quick decision.
It's really a mark of the pinnacle of achievement in the petrochemical industry.
His major contribution to our industry is the model of how you can run a business without burying yourself in a bureaucracy and a lot of waste.
It's probably overdue. I mean, if you look at it, at really the relatively short time frame that all this has been accomplished, driven by this one man, it's remarkable.
I think there's a great deal more to come from this man and his innovations and his contributions to our industry.
Your presence here this morning honors a world leader in the petrochemical industry and invites him to share his experiences, insights, and accumulated wisdom with IPC AFPM conferees. To introduce this year's awardee, I would call on my colleague, Jerry Law, president of the Founders Club.
Now, this is a rare treat for us, to meet the man who made INEOS. Jim Ratcliffe is a rare mix of entrepreneurial skills and deep petrochemical expertise, and commands a particularly effective common sense approach to business. Please join me in welcoming our 2013 Petrochemical Heritage Awardee, Jim Ratcliffe.
I can't bring myself to say thank you, Tom and Jerry. So I'm going to say thank you, Jerry and Tom. I have to say it's a great honour to be here. It certainly wasn't something I was anticipating, not something I would ever have contemplated in my earlier years. So it is a genuine honour to be here. I did notice that I think I'm the only Brit to have won this award. I was a bit concerned that your standards were slipping. I mean, I'm here, I presume, probably because of what INEOS has achieved. It's not just been myself that has done that. We're quite a tightly knit group of people in INEOS. And there's a number of INEOS people here today, certainly Andy Curry, Jim Dawson, Dennis Syfe, and a number of others. So it's very much been a team effort in INEOS to get us here. We're very focused on fixed costs, as you know, in INEOS, so it's impossible to find anybody in INEOS that would have the time to write a speech. So unfortunately, I've had to do that myself. So apologies in that regard. Now, look, the first 10 years, I think it was Tom quoted Shakespeare, wasn't it? The sort of a history of INEOS falls into 3 acts. That's as close as I get to Shakespeare. So Act 1 is our first 10 years. We started in 1998, we're 15 years old. The first 10 years was 98 to 2008. Obviously things changed in 2008. And if I'm to characterise INEOS in any way, I think, I mean, we like to think of ourselves as being nimble and entrepreneurial, but I think we have shown an ability to adapt to some very different economic circumstances. And these 3 acts are really, they are very different economic circumstances. So the first 10 years, we started with the acquisition of a medium-sized petrochemical facility in Antwerp from BP that made ethylene oxide and specialties, a few specialties. And that had sales of about $320 million. That was 1998. So in this next 10 years, we made 22 acquisitions. We grew by a factor of 146 times. I've done the maths, to $47 billion of sales. We carried out 8 financings during that period of time, and we raised about $15 billion. And it culminated really with that acquisition of BP Chemicals back in, it was called Innovene at the time, back in the end of 2005, which cost about $9 billion. So that was Act 1. There was lots of growth there, largely by acquisition. And then Act 2 was the recession. 2008 obviously hit us, the lights went out in the world. INEOS's profits, as did most manufacturing companies, they halved during that period of time. Our leverage just before the recession was just over 3 times, so it wasn't highly levered INEOS, because had we gone through this 10-year period and these various financings, we'd make a couple of acquisitions, we'd sort out those businesses, we'd pay down some debt, the debt would come down to a reasonable level, then we'd repeat that process. And so the debt had come down to a reasonable level before the recession, but when your profits halve, of course, your leverage doubles. The banks, who were fairly rapacious mood at the time, if you remember, they took $1 billion of cash out of INEOS during that recessionary period in 2008 and 2009, which is the last thing you need under those circumstances, but nevertheless, that's what happened. However, we survived all that. We did all the sort of the normal things you would expect. We cut fixed costs. We got very focused on our business and what have you. We did quite a lot of restructuring. We had 2 big refineries. We put those 2 refineries into a joint venture with Petrochina, which is the biggest oil company in China. And today that's about a $20 billion business. It's quite a large business with Petrochina. We put our styrenics assets into a joint venture with one of the bigger chemical companies, BASF. That's the biggest styrenics business in the world today, with sales of about $8 billion. We put our silicates crossfield business into a joint venture with Carlyle, a private equity, one of the biggest private equity companies. That's been quite successful. And we sold a few businesses, fluorine and films and what have you. And we managed our way out of that crisis. Today, the business is in great shape. It's more profitable than it was pre-crisis. And we pay down about $3 billion of debt, so the leverage is in a very sensible place today. So that's sort of end of Act 2. We then get to Act 3, which is a completely different set of circumstances again, which is really all revolves around shale gas and the changes in the world that's being created by this sort of shale gas explosion. And it clearly has enormous impacts here in the USA and the renaissance of your chemicals industry, particularly down here on the Gulf Coast, but it also will have its impact in Europe in a more negative manner. And we have a lot of assets in Europe. So that's occupying quite a lot of our thinking at the moment, the impact of that change in circumstances in the world, which has been very quick. Anyway, those are my 3 Shakespearean acts. To the how do we sort of get to where we've got to today? I think we do have what we call the INEOS model. It's quite different to other sort of companies of our sort of size. We're more of a sort of federation of businesses. We give our businesses a lot of autonomy and independence. We give our management, chief executives, a lot of autonomy and independence. The senior management participate fairly heavily in the equity in INEOS. So the people in INEOS tend to, well, I hope, behave more like owners than employees. And it hopefully sort of generates that sort of spirit of entrepreneurship and being nimble, making quick decisions. We're very focused on fixed costs, very focused on cash. Most of these businesses we acquired couldn't spell cash, but we are very focused on that and profit. Top quartile economics. In our sort of business, if you're not in top quartile or second quartile, then you probably don't have a terribly long future. So that occupies our mind. Best operator. We're very focused on reliability and those sorts of things. Again, these are very big, expensive machines. If you don't run them well, you don't make much money. Safety. I mean, I think everybody in our industry talks about safety. Because we have this sort of federation of businesses, we INEOS Capital, that is, attend a dozen to 15 board meetings a month for each of these individual businesses. And the first item on every board agenda in INEOS is safety, and we do spend a high percentage of our time talking about issues related to safety. And safety is heavily related to operating efficiency and reliability. I think Exxon proved that a long, long time ago. The two things go hand in, all the disciplines you require for good safety, you also require for good operating efficiencies and reliability and what have you. We don't like bureaucracy, which we feel sort of suffocates business. So there isn't a tremendous amount of bureaucracy in INEOS, I hope. And we try to take a long-term view. And that's all I'm prepared to divulge in terms of how we've done it. So that's it for me. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
How do you see Act 3 playing out for INEOS in North America and Europe?
It's not rocket science that what will happen in INEOS is our capital will gravitate towards the United States. We spend about, probably today, about $700 million a year of capital expenditure. And we're going to see that gravitate in the direction of the United States rather than elsewhere. Because clearly, we have one of, most of you probably know, we have one of the largest gas crackers here in the United States. I think it's the second largest one in the United States. It's just short of £4 billion. And it's a very profitable asset. But it's a very profitable asset on ethylene, which is $600 to $800 cheaper than it is in Europe. So, it's not just the ethylene business that's interesting in America. It's also the derivatives side as well. So, and we obviously, we're quite integrated into intermediates and have quite a lot of derivatives activity. So you'll see, I think, CapEx gravitate towards the United States. Europe's a different story. Europe remains in a difficult place, or a lot of it does anyway, not all of it. It hasn't recovered yet from its sort of crisis, which was triggered by Greece, I think, about 3 years ago. And it's quite difficult to see how it gets out of that problem that it's got. It's not underpinned by any cheap feedstocks, which obviously have sort of generated a lot of excitement over here. But this crisis that we have, which has sort of stymied all sort of growth in a lot of the countries in Europe. Europe sort of splits into two. You've got the manufacturing economies. You've got Germany, Belgium, Holland, Scandinavia. And then you've got the others, which are struggling, which is the UK, France, Italy, Spain, all the ones around the Mediterranean. And you've got this problem that they're all tied by a common currency, but you've got countries which economically are at quite different levels, and it's quite difficult to manage a country like Greece or Italy or Spain, which are in a different place to Germany, with the same currency. Because if you look historically, they've finished up in a place where they're paying their civil servants in those countries the same sort of prices that Germany is paying, but they can't afford that. They've borrowed a lot of euros. They've been encouraged to take a lot of euros to grow their economy. So they're laden with debt. And really, to get out of the situation they're in at the moment, you need some austerity measures. And of course, we have this expression: turkeys don't vote for Christmas. So people don't vote for austerity measures. So it's quite difficult to see how Europe gets itself out of that cycle. Because the countries won't vote to do the things they need to do to get their economies back into shape. So the problem, unfortunately, is perpetuating. Germany and sort of Holland, Belgium are doing quite well, but the rest of Europe is not. So, our view in Europe is that we have a long-term issue in Europe. We have quite a lot of assets in Europe. I think, if you look back at the beginning, certainly when we made that large acquisition of BP, probably 25% of INEOS's profits came from the United States, 75% from Europe, or the majority from Europe. And today, over 50% of the profits come from the United States, and I think that trend will continue. So I think from an INEOS point of view, we'll look at whether we can underpin any of our assets that we've got in Europe with cheap feedstocks in one form or another from the United States. And there'll have to be some rationalisation in Europe as well, probably.
I heard a talk very recently from the chief economist of the American Chemistry Council, which is the chief industry organization, who, all of you know economists, none of them are very fun to be around or very optimistic. But he was, and his prediction on behalf of the ACC was that mostly because of natural gas, that it was going to spark an unprecedented manufacturing boom in the US and probably around the world, and that by the end of 2014 we would be back down to 6.5% unemployment, which is a pretty big drop from where we are now. Do you think, from your point of view in Europe, that that's a realistic expectation for the US, and how might that play out in the rest of the world?
Well, I think my observation there sort of has its roots in what we see happening in the UK, which is the opposite, and it's been quite depressing what we've seen in the UK, where manufacturing has gone absolutely in the other direction. It's collapsed in the UK, manufacturing. If you look 15 years ago, manufacturing in the UK was at a similar level to that of Germany. I don't know whether, well, I'm not an economist. I'm not sure what I am, but I'm certainly not an economist. But if you look at basic economics, your economy splits into three parts. It splits into manufacturing, it splits into services, and it splits into agriculture. Agriculture tends to be a very small part, 5%, and then the rest of your economy, being generally, most countries, is predominantly made up of services and manufacturing. And for a country like the United States, it's probably 70% services and 22% of manufacturing, something like that. And a bit of agriculture. The UK and Germany 15 years ago were about the same. We both had about 23, 24, 25% of our economies were manufacturing. Today, Germany's economy is still 25% manufacturing and balance is services. In the UK, that 25% dropped to 10%. And as a consequence, the UK today, and it did that because the government were not particularly focused on manufacturing. They were much more interested in financial services. They thought financial services was the future, and so they didn't. At the end of the day, for manufacturing to be successful in a country, you need to have what we'd call USPs. That's a sort of American term, I think. Unique selling points. If you think about a place like the UK today, why would somebody want to manufacture in the UK? There aren't many USPs. There aren't many reasons why you'd go to the UK today, other than perhaps the English language, because taxes are relatively high, the unions are difficult, pensions are expensive, you've got logistics, energy costs are extremely expensive. If you look at America has got lots and lots of USPs, and it's got this enormously strong new one, which is cheap energy and cheap feedstock in chemicals. Because you've got a very big market, you've got skilled labour, the unions are sensible, your pensions are sensible, very energetic workforce. And on top of that now, you've got enormously cheap energy compared to Europe. I mean, it must be a third the price of Europe, which will, that will generate interest in all levels of manufacture, not just chemicals. That's going to be steel and all sorts of energy-intensive industries. And of course, you've got cheap feedstocks, which is going to drive the chemicals industry forward. So, I mean, I'm a very fervent believer in an economy must have a strong manufacturing base to be successful. The reason Germany in Europe is by far and away the strongest economy is because manufacturing has driven that economy out of that Eurozone recession. And the main reason the UK hasn't come out of that recession is because it has no manufacturing, or very little manufacturing. So I would encourage you to keep on with your manufacturing.
We're going to close the session now, but there is a traditional American question that we always ask of Brits, and it only requires a one-word answer. Stones or Beatles?
Probably got to be the Stones, I think.
Okay.